Hi, this is Lisa Rangel with Chameleon Resumes, the premier executive resume writing company, and thank you so much for joining me today. Today we're going to talk about effective salary negotiations, the how and the why. So this is a very near and dear subject to my heart. I'm very passionate about it. I think this is a subject that should be taught in high school, and even in with job searching in general should be taught in high school. But we'll save that for another video. But I want everyone here who's watching, no matter what the level you are at, even though I normally cater to and work with executives is where my recruiting experience lies, it's important that everyone knows how to do this and knows how to advocate for their own salary in their own salary negotiation. So first I want to talk about the why, and then we're going to talk about how to do it. So I have 3 reasons why you want to advocate for yourself in your salary negotiations and know this skill, learn this skill. The first is you cannot depend on people to do the right thing, and this is evidenced by that, Twitter hoopla a number of weeks ago. By the time you watch this, it might be months ago. That person who bragged about on Twitter that they were able to get someone at a lower salary despite their budget being significantly higher. I think it was like almost 60% higher. So, here's the thing. If you don't advocate for yourself, you cannot depend on others to teach you or to do it for you. Now, don't get me wrong. If you do misstep and lowball yourself for whatever reason, there are people in the world who will see this as a long-term play and realize it's only a matter of time before you figure out that you got lowballed, and then that will break the trust. So it's in their best interest, not only just to do the right thing, but it's in their best interest to make sure they maintain their trust with you, and they want you to stick around, that they will then obviously pay you whatever is the appropriate market rate that will make you feel good about it. But not everyone will do that, for various reasons. Some people will do it just because they feel like they can win. Other people will not do the right thing because they're fearful of their bosses and the powers above them. If they just, out of the goodness of their heart, pay a higher salary. So, there's a myriad of different reasons why people won't be able to do the right thing. And so that's why it's really important that you always advocate for yourself, because you can't depend on people doing the right thing. The second reason why you need to learn the skill of salary negotiation and advocate for yourself is, you cannot depend on published ranges to automatically put you at the high end. I have a big fear, and I think salary range publication is needed. It's awesome. It's a forward step that we all need, that companies all need to do. But my fear in doing it is that some candidates will think then, well, it's published, I don't need to negotiate. And this isn't cars, right? We're people. Negotiations are always going to happen. They state ranges. They have a fixed price on a house, and people still negotiate about it, right? There's a fixed price on rent, and people negotiate the rent. So just because there is a published salary range, that doesn't mean it's not negotiable, and it doesn't mean you shouldn't negotiate. So you still need to use negotiation skills to advocate for the highest possible salary for you based on your research, based on your skill set, and you need to do that. You cannot depend on a range to do that for you, and nobody's going to automatically default you to the high end if you don't bring the experience and communicate that to that particular hiring manager or recruiter. So, don't necessarily be influenced by the range as a reason why you shouldn't advocate for yourself. You absolutely always need to advocate for yourself. And even if there's a published range, who's to say that you can't ask for something above that if you have the goods and the skill set and the related achievements that they need for that job to capitalize on a particular opportunity or fix a massive problem, right? So just because there's a range doesn't mean you have to even stay within it if you got the goods. So, but that's only going to happen if you, again, negotiate and advocate for yourself. And then number 3 is that you can't depend on everyone to have done the research. Now, I know this may inflame a few people because they're like, I'm dealing with HR, I'm dealing with recruitment, I'm dealing with the CEO, the hiring manager. They should know what to pay for this job. Well, I'm just telling you that's not always the case. And so you need to, again, be armed with research, with, and I'm going to get into the how in the next few steps, but you need to be properly prepared with, what's going on in the market, what's going on in your specific discipline, what's going on in your industry, and how you can, leverage what you bring to the table based on, facts and based on, confirmed research. And you cannot depend on others to do that for you. Again, it kind of ties into the first point I brought up, that you just can't depend on people taking care of you. But this is a little bit more granular and concrete. You can't depend on people to do the research to know what they need to pay you. You may need to educate them, especially if it's a new company. They just may not know, even though they should, right? So don't let the shoulds get in the way, and just take care of yourself. All right, so now that we covered some of the whys, and I'm sure there's more, and I would love to see your comments down below for any of the other whys you want to add to that. Let's talk about some of the hows. And again, this won't be an exhaustive list either, but let's talk about a few so you can walk away with some points that you can implement today if you got an upcoming salary negotiation. So, the first thing is to do the research, and don't underestimate the power of the research. Look for similar titles of the jobs you're going for, similar titles of ones you've had, so you see where you compare in terms of what you've brought to the table in the past. Just again, it's just more of a self-inventory, because it's not, in most states, it's not legal to ask what you're currently making, but you just want to see where you fare, and have you been advocating for yourself strongly, or is this now a turning point where you need to start advocating for yourself strongly, right? So I think it's always important to look at just past research for your own sake, but then look at the titles that you're going for in the specific areas that you're going to be working in, and look at the research of what's being paid for those type of salaries, both the low end, the high end, what's the skill set, what's the experience level, and then where do you fall in that range? Have you been doing more than the experience level for what you would normally bring to the table at X amount of experience level? Are you doing more? Are you doing less? So this way, again, how to advocate for yourself. Some places to look are, salary.com, payscale.com, LinkedIn's salary feature, salary.com actually. So, this is where you want to make sure that you are armed with the research. And I would look on a few different sites. I would look for any industry specific or discipline specific type of association salary information that might be offered with associations you belong to or industry groups you might belong to, and see, and bring it all together and see what you can find there. Go in with that information on how it also correlates to your experience and what you bring to the table. And then the second thing that you can do is, go on like a Glassdoor or any sort of employer review forums and look for what's said negatively about the company. I don't say this so you can avoid the company. I say this so you go in eyes wide open, right? Because every company has its negatives, right? Even the top best employers to work for kind of places all have negatives, right? So look at the negatives. And if they're negatives that aren't really that big of a deal for you, like maybe you like working a lot of hours, maybe you like a flat organization, because then it's less bureaucracy, right? Some people like the layers; they view it as support, right? Everything has its pros and cons, right? So if the negatives are things that you like, and it's hard for the company to find people who like, that culture in that way. Maybe these certain little idiosyncrasies of the culture, frankly, these are things you can leverage, sometimes directly, sometimes subliminally, but these are things that you can leverage in terms of how you can come across for, requiring maybe an upper end of a range because you've worked in those types of cultures before, or you've worked with those types of parameters before, or you have no problem traveling, maybe during an era where everybody wants to work remotely. So, again, what are people complaining about? And is that something that you don't necessarily view as a big deal, or even maybe you view it as an asset, right? So now that's leverage, and you can use that. But again, this is all part of the information and the research. The third thing to do is ask. And this might be simple instruction, right? Or an obvious instruction, but I'm telling you, always ask. you really don't have anything to lose in most cases by asking. The only situation where you may not want to ask, and we've had this happen with one client in particular a few years ago, and I'll never forget it. They made an offer that just blew him out of the water. It was literally like well beyond like anything. It was like more than 70% more than he was looking for. And he's like, what should I do? I'm like, well, if it's 70% more than you were asking for, and he asked for a good number. This was not a lowball situation at all. I'm like, you can say yes. Like, you don't have to negotiate if they've completely blown your expectations out of the water in a good way, and you're thrilled and you're happy and it's more than fair. That would probably be the only situation I would say don't negotiate or don't ask, because people need to feel good about what they're doing for you, right? The essence of the negotiation is that both parties walk away feeling good, right? So if you feel good, they feel good, and it's a out of the ballpark kind of offer, fantastic, don't negotiate. But outside of that scenario, which doesn't happen very often, you want to make sure that you're always asking, because here's why. One, you might get it. And two, if you don't get it, the no is still okay. Because here's the thing, especially if you're going to still continue and take the offer and work there, they now know you will ask. They now know that you're not going to not ask probably in 6 to 12 months, when the next period to ask, if not sooner, is appropriate to address. So you've set the tone that you are somebody who will ask, which is always the type of reputation that you want. You want that employer to want to keep you, to know they're going to have to work at keeping you and making you happy. And so, in a good way, right? And so set the tone by being somebody who asks. So those are some hows and whys. This is by no means an exhaustive list. And I have a resource. I have my ebook, Fat Stacks, which helps you maximize your salary and compensation in your next offer. I have the link in which to buy the book, the ebook, in the description below. And, I do regular masterminds with executives on my list. If you want to make sure you get the announcements before the public of when I'm holding the next one, make sure you join my email list. You'll also see that link in the description as well. And I thank you so much for joining me today. If you have any questions, you can email me at lr@chameleonresumes.com or comment below. I read and reply to every email and every comment. If you like the video, I'm going to ask you to like it. If you want to make sure you don't miss next week's video, subscribe. And if you know someone who would benefit from this information so they can maximize their salary, I'm going to ask you to share the video. So thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you next week.